As sun sets on summer and dusk brings fall, the days grow short and the nights grow long. As dawn brings winter, the skies become gray and the wind grows cold. By the fireside is where the stories are told.
Begins along the fetid waters of the Thames in a year buried deep beneath dust and denial, when the river no longer whispered but groaned. This great stink, they called it, a name that veiled the truth. It was not the sewage alone that sickened the city, but something far older. Something that had been bound long ago beneath the foundations of Parliament. Not by accident had ancient laws been written in arcane phrasings, with curious spacings and obscure phrasing. They were not simply legal statutes, but binding charms, penned in blood under candlelight by those who knew what they faced. It began with a relic brought back from the colonies, an object unearthed beneath temple ruins that had not seen sunlight since the first stars fell from the skies. The men who bore it home were celebrated as adventurers, but within weeks of its arrival, madness touched their blood. Generations later, their descendants shambled through London's alleys, whispering to themselves and scratching at walls. They saw things in mirrors. They heard the buzzing. It was not a sound that others could hear at first. It came in sleep behind closed eyes, a signal like a distant wasp's drone, layered with something deeper, like chanting from beneath a lake. At first, it struck the cursed bloodlines, those tied to the object. Then it spread. By the hundreds, then the thousands. The afflicted lost their grip. They claimed to see letters shift on pages. People change faces. Buildings breathe. Doctors wrote of a collective hallucinations. Priests whispered of possession. Parliament said nothing. But those who had access to the hidden archives knew what had been disturbed. The seal had been fractured. That was its true name, though it was filed away in vaults beneath layers of fake terminology. The seal had once been whole, inscribed in a pact made long ago between the watchers of man and those that man must never watch. Not gods, but something else. Deities from the other side of memory, whose statues had no eyes, whose names were never spoken, and whose desires were not prayers but hungers. The buzzing signal was not broadcast by man. It did not come from wires or coils. It emerged from a point in space beneath the riverbed, pulsing like a heart The afflicted, in time, followed it. They walked into the Thames, not drowning, but dissolving, their bodies collapsing in dust and worms, feeding something beneath. Cultural decay took on a new meaning. The old churches emptied. The papers stopped printing. A fog rolled in from the sea, not mist, but a haze of wrongness, and through it tall figures wandered, blurred in shape, humming with the sound. The item from India remained locked in a vault, but it pulsed. Even behind iron and prayer, it vibrated. The cults had returned. They had always been among the elite, hiding behind smiles and charity. But now they bared their teeth. A spiritual war was underway, though none outside the fold recognized it. The symbols appeared again, not crosses or stars, but coiled sigils of hunger and inversion. Graffiti in ancient tongues, warning etched in bone. One judge, an old man with ties to the sill, tried to intervene. He released a document not seen in centuries, a transcription from a forgotten council. He vanished 2 days later, his home left unlocked, his mirrors shattered. His last journal entry described a face with no skin, speaking from a wall, inviting him to join the others in the silence beneath sound. The void, once a philosophical concept, took space in minds like a black geography. It was not emptiness, but negative fullness, a place of things that hated light, that had no eyes, but saw with gravity. Cities existed there, built from fossilized screams, ruled by entities that fed not on blood, but on memory and belief. Those touched by the signal began to disappear from photographs, from dreams, from the records of the dead. An antiquarian long obsessed with the old parchments had vanished. Who long obsessed with the old parchments and vanished monarchs traced the bloodlines of the cursed. He found they all connected back to a single moment in history when a man brought home a piece of something that had once been buried beneath the temple floor. The object was not a relic, but a fragment of a key meant to never be used. In the end, perhaps began again. No, it ended, or perhaps began again. On a night when the river ran black, and from the waters rose shapes, wearing the faces of those lost to madness. They spoke in voices, layered and wrong. The cults gathered in the open, then, bearing the buzzing relic, chanting names in a tongue that cracked windows and stilled clocks. Parliament burned, not from fire, but from time itself unwinding. What laws remained were shredded in the wind, and the veil that had once separated man from the dark, woven by belief, by law, by ancient lies, fell away like wet cloths. The rest is silence, but in that silence, the buzz remains. The miasma had returned, It rose off the Thames like a sick memory, curling through the alleyways of Wapping and Whitechapel, drowning the bells of St. George's in a haze that no fog ought to cry. To most, it was a nuisance, an old ghost from the time before the sewers, when cholera spoke louder than Parliament. But there were others who knew it for what it was. The loosening of an ancient seal laid down in shadow long before Rome set its foot on this island. They said the seal had been carved by hands no longer remembered, marked into the bedrock where the river curled. The old documents, strange vellums, bound in skin and etched in acid ink, called it the Quiet Pact. It held back the crawling ones, nameless deities whose whispered memories still rode the wind of the eastern deserts and the depths of the Indian jungle. It was said that one of these deities had been named in jest once, in a past now swallowed by the sands. The man who spoke that name had lived long enough to claw out his own ears. In the winter of that year, the buzzing began. It was faint at first, a vibration just at the edge of perception. Those who heard it dismissed it as nerves or poor health, but it did not leave. It grew louder with the weeks. Priests in Brixton spoke of a new plague. Barristers in Temple began to stammer in court, bleeding from their ears. Children in Lambeth drew spirals on the floorboards and spoke backwards in their sleep. Dr. Augustus Thorne, a forgotten scholar of morbid languages, returned from a self-imposed exile in Bengal. He had spent 12 years cataloging a series of occult scrolls, rumored to have been taken from beneath a ruined monastery. Scrolls that contained not words, but instructions on how to bind thought itself. He returned gaunt, half-blind, and carrying a small, lacquered box. He brought the box to Lord Hendricks Vine, a man of status whose family was whispered to be touched by old bloodlines whispers of madness and disease that had seen 3 generations locked in private sanitariums. Vine had dreams since childhood of a darkness beneath the city. He had once torn open the walls of his family crypt to follow the sound of weeping. They found him kneeling over bones that had not decayed, whispering in tongues older than Latin. The box contained a coin, not a coin of empire or treasury, but of something else. Something on one side etched with the seal on the other side. A labyrinth of intersecting lines in a voided circle at its center. The moment Vine touched it, he began to scream, not in pain, but recognition. Thorne tried to wrench it from him, but Vine would not let His eyes turned black, not with ink or blood, but with depth. It was as if something had stirred back from inside him. 3 nights later, Vine's estate burned. His servants vanished. The Thames ran thick and black that dawn. The seal had not broken. It had shifted. The veil that had once covered it had thinned. People began hearing the buzzing in every quarter. It came through walls, chimneys, even in silence. Those most affected began to speak of a presence. They called it the deep listener. A cult grew around it. They met in the old catacombs beneath Highgate. Once guards of forgotten bloodlines, they had become celebrants of the unraveling. They called themselves the custodians of the threshold. Their doctrine was simple. Knowledge must not awaken what was never meant to sleep. They wore scraps of antique uniforms and wrapped their heads in strips of burial shroud. They had one task: to kill those who approached the truth. Evelyn Marsh, a solicitor's daughter with a mind sharp as razors, uncovered one such truth by mistake. While sorting through an inheritance dispute, she found a letter-bound journal tucked between 2 volumes of land registry. It belonged to an officer who had sailed with the East India Company. His entries mentioned a ruined temple near the Vindhya Hills. He spoke of a bell that rang without sound in a stone chamber where one's reflection refused to move. His final entry simply read, "It listens. We should never have answered." Evelyn was not frightened, but fascinated. She brought the journal to a linguistics in Cambridge, a Professor Niles Harrow, who specialized in dead dialects. He found that some of the symbols etched in the margins matched those of the coin that had driven Vine to madness. They traced the language to an form of Sanskrit, with elements of something older, pre-phonetic, possibly artificial. Harrow became obsessed. He claimed the text was not written for humans, but for something that watched us. A warning not for us, but for it. He ceased eating, spoke in whispers, and drew a black spiral on the door of his flat. The custodians came for him at dusk. Evelyn escaped. Harold did not. The buzzing was no longer faint. It had become music, low rhythmic pulses that drove the weak-minded into fits. Murders increased. Fires lit up old neighborhoods. Hospitals overflowed with patients who clawed at their ears. The government denied everything, but in Parliament, the Prime Minister was heard mumbling a phrase in a voice not his own. Something about the watchers beyond the veil. The miasma from the flames grew darker, heavier. Scientists were baffled. No pollution explained it, yet those who inhaled it for too long fell into trance-like states, whispering of a gate that should never be opened. Children born in those months bore strange marks, not deformities but glyphs, perfectly formed, symmetrical, and glowing faintly under candlelight. Evelyn, now hunted, went underground with the help of an old archivist named Jonah Rook. She pieced together a map, not of the city, but of where the city had failed to be built. Places avoided, buried, or unmentioned. These spaces formed a pattern, a circle, and at its center lay a forgotten well in an overgrown courtyard behind a shattered chapel. They descended together, Rook first, lantern in hand, Evelyn clutching the journal. The walls were dry and smooth, impossibly so. They reached the bottom and found a door made not of wood or stone, but something like obsidian, humming with heatless life. The symbol on the coin was etched upon it. Evelyn placed her hand against the sill. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the world tilted. The veil did not rip. It thinned so completely it eased, or it ceased to exist. They saw beyond, not a place, but a truth. The void was not empty. It was full of things that had never known form. Ideas that hungered, shapes that could only be known by unknowing. The buzzing became a voice, not spoken, but felt behind the heart. It named her, not Evelyn, something else, something old. Rook was dead, turned inside out, his face still weeping where it hung on the ceiling. The door opened inward. She walked through. Above, the city coughed and died slowly. The miasma spread to the countryside. The buzzing reached the airwaves. Radios crackled with words in impossible cadence. Suicide rates spiked. The custodians failed to contain it. They turned on each other. The seal was not merely broken. It had never truly held. It had only delayed. A veil, a pack, a buzzing, a name, and a girl who was no longer a girl, but a vessel. She had not found the truth. She had become it.
As sun sets on summer and dusk brings fall, the days grow short and the nights grow long. As dawn brings winter, the skies become gray, and the wind grows cold. By the fireside is where the stories are told.